You ever watched a tiny crack in a windshield slowly spread until the whole glass is shattered? That's what happened after 1492 with the Columbian Exchange, a small event that causes huge changes across two continents and beyond. What started as a single moment of exploration turned into something that reshaped the entire world. When Columbus landed in the Americas, it was like finding a secret vault full of things Europe had never seen before. Crops like potatoes, corn, and tomatoes were brought back to Europe, and these new foods worked like high octane fuel, helping Europe's population explode. For example, Ireland's reliance on the potato allowed its population to double between 1750 and 1850. Imagine Europe as a car running on low quality gas, barely getting by. Then suddenly it gets premium fuel, and the population zooms ahead stronger than ever. Alongside these, the Americas also supplied sugar, coffee, and tobacco, luxury goods that quickly became essentials in European life, particularly in places like England and France, where coffee houses became social hubs. Europe, in turn, brought over wheat, cattle, and pigs, with wheat transforming the diets of many indigenous peoples, and cattle creating vast ranches in the Americas, especially in places like Argentina and Mexico. This exchange didn't just change what people ate, it changed how they lived. The Spanish explorers struck gold, literally. The discovery of gold and silver in the Americas, particularly silver at Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, was like winning a lottery no one even knew was happening. Potosi's silver mines produced so much wealth that by the mid-1600s, the Spanish were shipping an estimated two-thirds of the world's silver from the Americas. This didn't just make Spain rich, it transformed Europe's entire economy. Wealth from the Americas helped shift Europe from feudalism, where peasants were tied to lords, like small, self-sustaining towns, to capitalism, an economic system driven by trade, investment, and competition. For example, the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company were among the first joint stock companies, using money from investors to dominate trade routes. Imagine going from selling lemonade in your driveway to managing a worldwide company. That's the scale of change. This transition from feudalism to capitalism didn't just impact the elite, it transformed the lives of everyday Europeans. For peasants, who once worked for local lords in exchange for protection and a share of the land's produce, the new economic system offered opportunities and risks. Some moved to cities to work in emerging industries, like textile production, while others invested in new ventures. Wealth, however, was unevenly distributed, with many still trapped in poverty, as wealthy merchants and landowners profited. Africa became part of this system too, not just as a source of gold and trade goods like ivory and spices, but tragically as part of the Atlantic slave trade. The exchange of crops and wealth came at a devastating human cost. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, an estimated 12 million Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas to work on plantations, particularly in the Caribbean and Brazil, where they grew crops like sugar and cotton. Many of these enslaved Africans never saw their homelands again, and the inhumane conditions aboard the Middle Passage ships were brutal. The social and economic impacts of the slave trade still reverberate today, as the effects of this exploitation shape the history of both the African continent and the Americas. How did they make this happen? Improvements in maritime technology were like switching from walking to driving a sports car. The invention of the caravel, a light and fast ship used by the Portuguese and Spanish, made transatlantic voyages much quicker and safer. Trade could happen across oceans like never before. And joint stock companies were like an early version of today's crowdfunding platforms. Investors in the Virginia Company pooled their money to establish the Jamestown colony in 1607, sharing both the risks and the potential rewards of colonization. This was the beginning of modern financial markets, much like how platforms like Kickstarter allow people to contribute to a shared goal, with profits or rewards distributed afterward. Another key innovation was the astrolabe, which allowed sailors to navigate using the stars. Combined with detailed maps from cartographers like Gerardus Mercator, Europeans could travel to far-off lands with greater confidence. But the Columbian Exchange didn't stop at trade. It also unleashed a cultural exchange. Religion, technology, and ideas flowed between the continents. Europeans brought Christianity, along with tools like metal plows and firearms. Missionaries like Bartolomé de las Casas worked to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity, sometimes peacefully and other times through force. The native populations, in turn, introduced Europeans to their own knowledge, such as advanced agricultural techniques used to grow maize, corn, and chocolate, which became a prized luxury in Europe. The two worlds didn't just exchange goods, they also exchanged ways of thinking, though often through conflict and coercion rather than cooperation. The exchange wasn't limited to the Americas and Europe. Asia also felt the effects. Silver from the Americas found its way to China, where it became the backbone of the Chinese economy in the Ming Dynasty. European traders used American silver to purchase Chinese goods like silk and porcelain, creating the first truly global trading network. Meanwhile, crops like sweet potatoes and peanuts made their way to Asia, changing farming practices in countries like Japan and China. This blending of cultures even created entirely new cultural identities. For instance, in the Caribbean, African, European, and indigenous cultures mixed to form Creole societies, which developed unique languages, religions, and cuisines that continue today. Yet, not all of these changes were positive. For the native populations, the exchange often felt more like a wildfire burning through their societies. The Spanish conquest brought deadly diseases like smallpox, which the Europeans unknowingly carried. In just a few decades, smallpox killed an estimated 90% of the native population in places like Mexico and Peru, decimating empires like the Aztecs and Incas. It was like their entire world was being attacked by something they couldn't see or defend against. Beyond disease, animals like horses radically altered native ways of life. For example, the Plains Indians in North America adopted horses to hunt bison more efficiently, which transformed their nomadic cultures. This change was much like a wildfire reshaping a forest, destructive, but also creating new possibilities. Environmental changes followed too. The introduction of European crops and animals into the Americas disrupted ecosystems, much like the introduction of invasive species today. For instance, the introduction of sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean and coffee plantations in Brazil led to massive deforestation and soil depletion, permanently altering the landscape. New farming techniques altered the environments in both continents, contributing to changes in soil fertility and biodiversity. Fields that once grew indigenous crops like manioc or cassava were replaced with European crops such as wheat, forever changing the land's character and the diets of the people who live there. These environmental changes weren't limited to the past. Today, modern agriculture still faces issues of soil depletion, water scarcity, and deforestation as a result of practices that began during the Columbian Exchange. Resistance was inevitable. While some native groups were devastated by disease and warfare, others fought back against colonization. The Mapuche people in Chile fiercely resisted Spanish rule, maintaining their independence through guerrilla warfare for centuries. Other groups, like the Pueblo in modern-day New Mexico, successfully revolted against Spanish rule during the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, temporarily driving the Spanish out of their territory. Some indigenous groups also adapted strategically, using European tools like metal weapons and animals like horses to strengthen their own societies. However, the imbalance of power, fueled by European technology and disease, made long-term resistance difficult, and many native cultures faced destruction or forced assimilation. Even today, the impact of the Columbian Exchange is all around us. Think about the foods you eat: potatoes in your fries, tomatoes in pizza sauce, chocolate in candy bars, and corn in everything from tortillas to popcorn. These all came from the Americas. Meanwhile, staples like wheat, rice, and sugar, which are now global, were once limited to certain regions before the Columbian Exchange spread them worldwide. The introduction of these crops and goods wasn't just about food, though. The trade systems we rely on today, like global supply chains for coffee and electronics, have their roots in the patterns of exchange started during this period. The Columbian Exchange laid the foundation for modern globalization, bringing the world into a new era of trade and interaction. And while these exchanges built the global economy we know today, they also had long-lasting consequences for the people and the environments of both continents. The ripple effect of those initial exchanges can still be seen, from the foods we eat to the global trade networks that run the world. It's like how the internet has connected everyone, but also raised big questions about privacy, security, and inequality. Big changes come with big consequences. So what started as a few explorers crossing the ocean quickly grew into something far bigger. It's like that crack in the windshield that, with time, shatters everything. Two worlds collided, sometimes for the better, but often for the worse, and the echoes of that collision can still be felt today, shaping the world we live in.